The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the webinar. I'm so glad you could spend some time with us today. My name is Jim Tobin and I will be hosting this webinar along with Erin Ledbetter. Just a little bit of FYI, so you know we are recording this webinar. We will send everyone the recording in advance. So let's get to some housekeeping. We're going to try and keep this moving along quickly. I don't think it'll take quite the whole hour. We've got a lot of stuff in here. We're going to move fairly quickly, so we hope that will create questions. Use the questions panel on the GoToWebinar screen you see there and submit questions. We are planning to leave plenty of time for those, and to get the most out of this, I hope you'll ask them. I mentioned already that we are providing the recording later, and we will be monitoring at Carusele, spelled a little funny, and hashtag influencer webinar for any additional comments or questions. But the best way to submit your question is through the question box in GoToWebinar. My name is Jim Tobin. I'm the fairly goofy looking fellow on the left. I founded a company called Ignite Social Media in 2007. We still continue to do work for brands as a social media. And then Carusele, our new company, which we spun out of Ignite in 2015. I've written a couple books on social media, the first one in 2008, the second one in 2013. And then we've worked with a lot of the best brands in the world over the years, from Microsoft to Samsung. You see many of those listed there, and many, many more we've been honored to work with over the years. So very pleased with that. And I'm also joined by Erin Ledbetter.
Hello.
She is a senior vice president at Carusele. She has been working with me and the Ignite team for 9 years now. 9 years now, and now currently serves as senior vice president of Carusele. So she works on the product side of the influencer marketing program, and I work more on the marketing side of it. But we both like thinking about things like, how do you measure influencer marketing, which is today's topic. But before we get there, I mean, one of the reasons we're taking this more seriously and that brands are taking this more seriously, there's a couple reasons. On the left side of this chart, you see here that brands are reporting good return, at least measured by earned media value, on every dollar they're investing. In the lower left here, the nice part about influencer marketing is that it lives on well after your spend stops. So that's a real benefit that isn't true of banner ads or a lot of other places you can spend your money. And people are consuming the content up to a fifth of all media consumption, according to a recent study. I feel like that's a little high, but they're saying 20% of all media consumption is now online influencer content. If I look at my daughters on YouTube, their whole life, apparently it begins to be realistic. And people are buying off of influencer marketing and solely based on influencer recommendations, and they turn out to be even better customers than those acquired through normal methods. That may be great, but we've got to get into a little more detail for our bosses, if you will, our clients and our bosses. So budgets are increasing, and that is a good thing for those of us in the space, obviously, but it's also shining a much brighter light on it to make sure these investments, which we're now seeing multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars per campaign going into these investments, is it working? If we're going to invest that kind of money, how are we going to know if we're successful? So marketers, by and large, 86% are saying they invest in it. About half are investing more this year than they did last year, and they're about doubling their budgets. It's still relatively small compared to some other things like TV budgets and some of those things. Even print budgets are still significantly higher, but it's moving quickly in an upward direction. So what we need to know, and all the content we'll share throughout this deck is from actual Carusele campaigns, but sure, it's good looking content, but do we know if it's generating real meaningful results? That's why you're on the call today, and we've got at least 6 answers for you. So Erin, why don't you take over the hard stuff and start bringing us into this?
So let me do the thinking here. So what we're going to take you through today are 6 different ways to evaluate influencer marketing campaigns, ways that we use every day for our clients. Everything from the holy grail of direct sales lift. Wouldn't that be great if we could get that for every campaign we ran in marketing in general? I would be a billionaire if I solved that problem. So excited to have figured it out a little bit for influencer here. Correlated sales lift, and then looking at some different business level measures that are more like proxy KPIs. So share of voice, equivalent media value, Jim mentioned is a popular popular way to that a lot of brands are looking at measuring the value of influencer. We also look at audience attention, and there's a lot of added value from these programs that we can start to put value metrics around. And so we're going to take you through each of those today. So the first one, direct lift, like I mentioned, this is the holy grail. To my knowledge, this has only actually been done once in this type of study. It was a study that Nielsen Catalina ran. Lots of research from them as far as shopper and sales analysis has been done. And the way this study worked, it was a campaign run by White Wave Foods for their Silk Almond Milk product. They basically put embedded pixels on every blog post relevant to this campaign, and then they were able to track purchase behaviors of people who viewed those blog posts against a control group of people who didn't view those blog posts. So what they saw here, 285% increment, or $285 of incremental sales lift for every 1,000 people exposed to this content. That was 11 times better than the average in the category for Nielsen Catalina on a digital display ad. So pretty powerful stuff. And what's even more cool here is you see this in the bottom right corner, which Jim was mentioning toward the beginning of this presentation. They saw ROI double in the 6 months following the end of the active campaign period. So pretty powerful results backed by Nielsen Catalina in partnership with White Wave Foods here. But, there's only been to this day this type of study done by one brand. And there's a lot of reasons when it comes to watch outs for this type of analysis that brands have to consider. So one of the things, this particular study had over 250 blog posts, more than that included in the program. To get to that level of scale for an influencer program, we're seeing brands have to spend 5 to 10 times greater than the average investment that brands are putting towards a single influencer campaign right now. So just to give you a sense, that's a pretty significant scale you have to reach in order to run a study like this. And even if you meet that scale, and if you've done Nielsen Catalina studies before, you're probably familiar with this, but you do have to hit certain household penetration thresholds to be able to do a valid study within their system. And that can be incredibly difficult for brands that are looking to do a campaign that targets a specific retailer, because then you have to meet that household penetration, not just nationally, but at that particular retailer.
You also have to have enough purchase frequency to expect to see a sales lift. So if you have the same budget for, say, cars doing this program, you couldn't measure it because people buy cars once every 7 years. So that's sort of an extreme example. But even if you're, I don't know, maybe batteries, maybe you buy batteries twice a year, I don't know. You have to look at not only the penetration in their panel. Nielsen has about a 2 million person panel, but then you have to look at buying frequency too.
Yeah. And then the one other watch out, like I mentioned, the reason I think brands aren't doing a lot of this is because for this study to work, they had to place pixels on blogs. And as you guys know, if you've been doing influencer marketing, this study is about 2 years old. The campaign itself was run about 2.5 years ago. And blogs just aren't as relevant today as influencer activations on, say, Instagram or Facebook, where we really don't have the ability to pixel content. So, it's one of those things that's quite limiting with a study like this, although you know that, Nielsen is looking for new ways to activate on other channels. So hopefully we'll have the opportunity to expand a study like this across new channels pretty soon. If we can't get to direct sales lift, correlated is the way that we've been doing it for most of our clients, because we're able to at least say, what's a good chance that we were able to affect sales lift in this way? So we tend to look at how do the impression delivery or the content publication or the engagements that we gained in a campaign, how do some of those campaign KPIs correlate and line up against sales lift data that we can get for the products featured or the brands featured in a campaign? Now, if you're familiar with correlations, a correlation of 0.7 or higher is a good correlation. And so that's really what we're looking for to suggest, did the delivery in this campaign affect or correlate to the sales lift that we saw? Of course, a couple watch outs here. Correlation does not equal causation. We know that. But if we can get our benchmark periods, if we can figure those out to make sure that we've gotten rid of as many other variables as possible. So typically we recommend to brands that you don't have any other change in your marketing mix or marketing strategy, no significant changes in messaging. When you look for a benchmark period, you want to make sure if there's offers running that they're at least similar in value, and that you look for things like seasonality or distribution. If distribution is lower in the benchmark before and you have more distribution now, obviously there's going to be a natural lift. So we try to look for benchmark periods that take out all those factors. You can see here this one example for Frito-Lay. This was actually one of those campaigns where the correlation was not only so strong, but the lift was so high that we almost didn't believe it. We kind of didn't believe it, but we had backed out as many different variables as we possibly could to get to numbers like this.
We had another one that's not in this deck that we did recently for Revlon, and you do have to look at other things, like if a vendor buys an end cap and the product's at the end of the aisle, it's going to sell more than when it's in the middle. So you have to look for all those sort of variables, like you said. With Revlon, what we were able to do is have an offer that was the same offer. It was a BOGO, and it was made available the same time period 3 months earlier. So the same value offer on the same product line at the same retailer at the same time period of the week in this case. And so we stripped out as many of those poisoning factors as you can, and then we found really strong sales lift. We did about 209% better in sales than when they ran the same offer without influencers. So can you strip it out and say no, because you could have 100% correlation with your impressions, but if you have end caps, it's actually the end caps did all the work. So you have to strip out as much as you can, but if you do that, the information we got for Revlon, for example, was really, really compelling.
So there's other factors too. So we're talking about sales lift, but you can't always get sales lift, and sometimes it takes a while to get that sales data. So we've looked at other KPIs that are also really good indicators of, did this drive the business metrics that you need to drive? For Haagen-Dazs, for example, we ended up getting sales lift later, but one of the most compelling stats that we were able to get right after, or actually why the campaign was running, was the restock rate. They knew the campaign was working because they saw a 49% lift in what the restock needed to be, because product was moving off the shelves so much more quickly than the benchmark period. For Walgreens mobile app, for example, we were able to see a lift in app downloads, correlating with the impressions that we were able to deliver. But what was really neat about this one is not only did we see a lift in app downloads, but we were also able to look at other user KPIs for the app. So things like first launch visitors, so not people who just downloaded the app, but who actually launched the app and used it for the first time, a 37% lift, which told us as a business that not only did we get people to download the app and get new users, but we were getting people that had already downloaded to actually start using the app. So that was really great to see, really aligned with the business metrics that at the end of the day, the brand was trying to drive. Here's a different campaign from the one Jim was just talking about for Revlon. We saw not only a lift in sales, but a lift in first-time buyers, which means we had people who had never bought Revlon products at that particular retailer before now purchasing Revlon, which meant we were able to bring new people into the fold. Another really powerful thing for this brand. And then, of course, one of the best ways to do this, if you don't have the ability to do that sales level analysis, or you want to just see what exactly the campaign drove, is to have an exclusive coupon. For Ready Whip here, we had 250,000 coupon downloads, which was actually the cap for the campaign, coupon downloads at Walmart. So there was this opportunity to drive this immediate action through influencer content that told us, let us look at these buying indicators.
And what most of these have in common is either a particular retailer or access to, in the app case, the app data. So this would also work for e-commerce, obviously. Special offers to e-commerce sites, those sorts of things would be other places you could use this. So I'm going to take it from here for a second. Share of voice impact is another thing we look at on a regular basis. And first I want to describe what it is and then why it matters. So basically, what we're able to do through most any social listening tool, so think Brandwatch or Sysomos or any of those sort of tools, is measure the mentions of the brand against the competitors prior to the campaign and then again during a similar benchmark period. So it's important when you build those to make sure it's a relevant thing. So for example, when we worked on all the Chrysler brands, we would take out the word buy or the word sell. So people who were buying or selling their used Chrysler wouldn't come up in and pollute the conversation stream. So making sure it's not only the brand mentions, but you have your negative keywords as well to filter out a consistent benchmark sort of share of voice. And then using that same filtering, can you impact the number of mentions of share of voice during the campaign relative to the competitor set? So you see here, in this Jared example, that before the campaign ran, about 72% of the mentions were from a competitor and only about 22% were Jared. During the campaign, we shifted that to almost reverse, 65% Jared and 29% for that same competitor. Now, why does this matter? It matters for a couple reasons. First of all, if you look at this third-party research here, and this is generally speaking in marketing, for every 10 points that your share of voice exceeds share of market, the brand can expect to gain 1 point of market share every year. So if people are talking about you more than your share of sales is likely to go up. And so share of voice has been a popular metric for television advertising for decades now. Hey, there's 100 commercials out there. What percentage were ours? What percentage were our competitors? We want to make sure people are hearing about us at least as much or more than they're hearing about our competitors. So what we're doing with influencer is tracking online share of voice. And what we see is not only, of course, the influencers aren't talking about this brand. We pay them to. It makes sense they would mention the brand. But good campaigns have participants talking back, depending on your tactics. And that's the sort of second bullet level here down under the watchouts. Not every tactic is designed to affect share of voice. Sometimes you want to do different things, like Twitter's really good for share of voice because all the tweets are generally 99% of tweets are public facing. Other platforms are less likely to be picked up. So we have dark social posts. We have some other ways where people are sharing that we can't pick it up. But if you do your benchmark, it washes out a little bit because you can't pick that up in the benchmark period either.
Yeah, the other thing to consider with this, so I mean, you can see for Jared, for example, we went from 22 to 65. So let's say Jared's share of market is only 30%, and for every 10%, for every 10 points we exceed that, we should expect 1 share of market point to grow. Now, obviously, we're not increasing their share of market by 3 points here just from this one little program. But the whole idea is that when you have these influencer campaigns that can drive consistent and ongoing spikes in share of voice throughout the year, your overall annualized share of voice is going to increase, and that's where your share of market should follow, which is why we look at it for each of these campaigns throughout the year.
And a single point of market share shifting from one competitor to another at these large retailers is a tremendous amount of money. So we're contributing to that with the online share of voice. There's still the television and all the other marketing that these brands do as well, but certainly influencers should contribute to it as well. Now, equivalent media value, I've seen at times that this one can get a bad rap periodically. I think partly because the PR industry used equivalent media value for newspaper articles. They often used a multiplier. Well, a newspaper article is 3 times better than an ad. So I'm going to take the space it would have taken to buy this ad, and I'm going to multiply by 3. That was kind of arbitrary. So it got a little bit of, a bad rap. I don't think it needs to be quite that arbitrary with what we're doing here. And so the way we look at it is, what is a benchmark CPM? So if you bought, let me take a step back. We know in influencer marketing we're getting impressions. We know in influencer marketing we're getting engagements. We know in influencer marketing we're getting clicks. We know in influencer marketing we're getting site visits if we're trying to. And all of those things are things that brands can pay to get through other methods. And so what we do with our equivalent media value model, which you can do with yours, is we say, okay, what does it cost to get 1,000 impressions? So what's the CPM on that? Or what does it cost to get an engagement? What's the CPE on that? And then does that include content production? Because remember, influencer marketing includes content production. Banner ad media buys do not include media fees typically. So all those sort of fees going into it. But then we can say, okay, we got whatever 20 million impressions and we got 10,000 clicks to the website and we got all that. You can add that up and say, okay, to get that many impressions, to get that many clicks, what would it have cost me if I had chosen another path, if I had chosen native content, if I had chosen banner ads, if I had chosen ads in the newspaper, whatever I might want to do. One of the reasons I like this is because it's really difficult for a lot of brands to get sales data, either because they're cars that are sold infrequently or they're sold through a channel where that data is just never going to be available. Those sorts of things are very difficult to get. This one's important because as marketers, you see here we work with a fair number of large brands. I have yet to find a brand with enough money. We've worked with P&G brands, the world's largest advertiser. Nobody has enough money. And as a result, everybody is making a decision. Do I put this money here or do I put this money there? And what this says to you is, I can't answer maybe all of your questions, but I can answer one. What would have gotten you more? So that's equivalent media value. And it's fairly easy. If you take your time with a little spreadsheet and a little math, you can calculate it fairly easily.
Yeah, so another metric, I think Jim alluded to this a little earlier, that people look at a lot is attention. So this is pretty popular metric in the TV advertising space, and we've adapted it for influencer marketing. And so there's a lot of conversation, if you will, going, just in the media space in general right now, about the quality of impressions delivered, and influencer being on the in the digital space and being on borrowed platforms in the digital space nonetheless, where we really can't get into those, verified true view impressions because we don't own where those impressions are being delivered. There's brands saying, well, how do I know that these are good impressions? And so we have this attention model as a way to look at the engagements that are happening on that content and put a value around those engagements, because in order to engage with a piece of content, you had to have seen it. So that's how we know that someone actually viewed this content. They took an action with it. And so what we do is we put a value in a time perspective on each piece, on each type of engagement that you can have. So it was actually a study that we did in-house where we said, how long does it take the average internet user to leave a comment on a Facebook page, or view and read an entire blog post, or share a tweet or retweet something, and how much time does it take to do each of those actions? And then we can start to do a multiplier and say, okay, if we got 500 likes on a Facebook post and a like is valued at 2 seconds, we can get to that attention, and we can say we know that people spent 50,000 minutes of time with this content. And so it's a really powerful metric for the brands to say, we know people were spending time with this content, just as if you were to say, okay, we did a 30-second TV spot, we knew it reached 1 million people, we have 500,000 minutes of attention. Exactly how this works. One of the kind of watch outs for this is because you can do attention models like this for other types of media, you do have to make sure that the way you're doing those calculations are relatively equal. So a view is not a view is not a view if you're talking about a 30-second TV spot versus a 90-second video or a 6-second video. You've got to keep, not every video view, for example, is valued the same, and you've got to take those things into account. Text length matters too. That's one of the things that we had to consider. What the average length of a blog post, what's the average length of a Facebook post. Just a view of each of those things is different because it takes longer to consume that content depending on the length of the content.
Just a reminder, you can submit your questions in the questions panel. I'm happy to answer all those at the end of the program, and we'll continue. I'm trying to advance the slides. There we go.
So we've talked through 5 ways that we can actually put business value metrics that you could also compare across other types of marketing as you're trying to figure out where to put your marketing dollars. But there's a lot of added value that comes out of these. So we talked about the Silk White Wave study in the beginning and how, a typical digital ad campaign, for example, once the buy is done, once the media runs out, the campaign's over, and that's it, and your money's spent. With influencer campaigns, there's a lot of long tail to these campaigns. So depending on how you negotiate content rights with the influencers, that content can be extremely valuable. At Carusele, for example, all of our influencers, they provide unlimited use perpetual rights, meaning the clients that run these campaigns have access to this content and they can use that content anywhere, anyhow, forever. So you don't have to worry about in 2 years from now finding that content and going and taking it down because you only have the right to use it or a license to use it for 2 years. So this example, EAS, they used it on their website, they use it in social posts, they use it in ads. There's a lot of variety, especially because influencers and the quality of content they can create. And so we can start to put a value on this content. So you can say a photo, for example, what would it take me to get? We typically, because if you think of how influencers create content, we typically look not what it would take you to get from an agency, although a lot of times this content looks good, if not better than what an agency could produce. But if you were to go hire a freelancer, what would it cost them to get this content for you? And so, you can play with the content values, but we show here what we value these things at because we're using that kind of freelancer model. And you can start to say, okay, if it's going to cost me $1,000 to get a blog post and $750 to get a video, and I got 10 videos and 20 blog posts and 100 photos, and you can get to the value of the content for the campaign. So that's something to consider.
This comes sometimes the $250 photo, for example, can really be very, very conservative. So it's overstated if the brand never uses any of this stuff, but it's understated when they do. So we had Revlon use one of our influencers' images on a Times Square billboard. If they had set up a shoot for a Times Square billboard, I'm confident the shoot alone would have cost $20,000. Yeah. So 250 becomes pretty conservative. EAS has the front, the home page of their website with this, one of our influencers doing that yoga pose, which, by the way, I could totally do.
He actually tried it. Check out our Instagram handle at Carusele. It's there. Shameless plug for silly photo content.
So, it becomes really valuable. And when you think about, again, do I spend my money on influencer or do I spend it on banner ads, just to go back to something else digital? Well, I've got to pay an agency to produce the banner ads. I may pay an agency to run the media, all those sort of things. And then I probably, if I'm using any talent in the creative, I probably have limited rights to it. It becomes a really valuable thing to certain brands.
Yeah, we also, just last note on here, it does depend on the brand, but a lot of times we'll see brands report back to us that the influencer content is getting higher engagement on their channels than the stuff the brand's creating. And, part of that is because the natural setting, it's more authentic and organic content. Another part of that is because you can use the influencer's name and it gives it that third-party credibility to that content too. So there's definitely a lot of value in using this content beyond just what it would have cost you to create it yourself.
Yeah, if you look at this yoga pose on the website, that's one shot, but we had 325 pieces of content and, a dozen plus models in that content. That's an expensive shoot.
Yep. So another piece of added value is the long tail. So as we mentioned, this content doesn't go away. And depending on some channels, Twitter's got a very short life. Facebook tending to have a shorter life, although sometimes it feels like I'm seeing the same post in my feed 3 days in a row. But there's certain channels, blogs in particular, research tells us that blogs will see 50% of the total views of a blog post after the first 30 days that it's been live. So there's definitely value there. That long tail of a blog post tends to go on for 2 years. This example here from Ian J. Gallo, there was a Pinterest board created for this campaign, and we saw 20% growth on that board in the year following after influencers stopped promoting it. So especially from a search and discovery perspective, Pinterest is becoming basically a search engine these days. Blogs obviously showing up on search. There's definitely a long tail value of these campaigns that can't be quantified right when the campaign ends.
And speaking of Pinterest, we're seeing less engagement than we were a couple months ago on Pinterest, in part because they got rid of there was a save button and there was a like button and a repin button,
Yeah.
and now it's just a save button. And engagement, as measured by clicking on that button, is way down, but it's part of their morphing into really a visual search engine.
Yeah.
All right, there is more though. So we talked about those sort of KPIs. Those are our 6. We're actually working now on a foot traffic study, and we hope to launch soon to measure actually who saw this content and then whether at what rate they walked into a particular retailer or retailers. So there's always more to come on this, but even beyond the 6 ways we've given you to measure, there's a bunch of information in the data you're getting from an influencer campaign, if you're able to look for it, that really helps your overall marketing strategy. So some examples of this: we have created an algorithm that we call iStack, and what it basically does is we've got multiple influencers, right, in a given campaign, and they have different follower counts. They may have different, one's more emphasis on Instagram and one's more emphasis on video creation, whatever that case may be, and they may have one home run piece of content. And it's sort of hard to tell, well, who did the best? I really like this one Instagram post and it did really well. Well, I like this YouTube video and it seemed to do really well. So we basically have built an algorithm that scores not only engagement, it factors in reach, because the part of what we're trying to do with influencer marketing is reach people, but it also factors in efficiency. So if we have 2 influencers who do the same sort of quality, but one charged twice as much as the other, that needs to be factored in here. And so the smarter people on our team, like Ryan Sweeney, we're able to do the math that automatically stack ranks our influencers. And this is results from an actual campaign with the influencer's name sort of grayed out here. And you can see when 100 is the sort of average, that you have influencers on the low side and influencers on the high side. This is important. I think it's interesting if you're only doing a single campaign. Oh, it's nice to know who the top 5 influencers were. It's really important as you look to say, who should I hire next time? And do I want to do an ambassador campaign that runs all year? Which influencers create content that resonates, does it efficiently, and gets me that sort of reach? The other thing, we're creating in a given campaign, we had that EAS campaign, had 325 pieces of content. Well, the nice part about what we're doing is that we're pulling in, we've built some systems that pull in real time every Facebook post, every Instagram, every tweet, every blog post, all of that stuff, normalizes it across platforms and ranks it based on engagement. And so while a lot of people have said organic reach is dead, A, you're generally using influencers because you don't subscribe to that, but B, even if organic reach is down, it is still a very interesting focus group to measure the performance of a particular set of content. So at Carusele, what we do is we then take those high performing pieces and then we boost only those. So it's a little bit of a hybrid influencer model that we built here, but basically you're going to find, and we find this in every campaign, if you have 100 pieces of content, 15 or 20 are going to be by far the best. They're just going to do better than the rest. And the rest will be sort of in a spectrum behind them. And so knowing what those pieces of content are, the reason EAS came back and said this social content is crushing it relative to our in-house produced content is because we had already tested it in the social web on the influencers channels and said, here are the 10 pieces that got the best content, and then we actually rank every single piece of content by order, and so you can go through and find a piece you like and see, oh yeah, this is in the top 10%, I'm going to share this content. So the ability to, in our agency experience, we create content, we think we have insights to what might do well, but you don't really know until you share. Well, in this case, you're sharing dozens or hundreds of pieces of content. You should be able to rank which ones did the best.
Yeah, and the other thing I really like about this is that influencers are always going to put their own spin, their own angles that you would never think of yourself on your key messages that you've given them, on what the content approach they take. And when you start to look at themes across the top performing content that kind of bubbles up through this algorithm, we can see things like, an example that just came out, putting the product on a neutral background, for example, drove the highest level of engagement. So there's insight that now that brand's creative team can go take, because we're seeing every single photo that's bubbling to the top is on a neutral background. It's in a kitchen, it's on clean, white, neutral granite. So those types of creative insights you can get from from content performance analysis like this, not just, here's the 10 top pieces, go use them.
The other thing is getting insights into the audience that you're creating. Now, this is something a little bit different that we're doing, but there may be a way for you to hack it together yourself. But what we're basically doing is we're taking anyone who clicks on any of these through to the blog post or in a blog post out to something or through social syndication, anyone who clicks on that, we're then automatically creating a custom audience for them, and we're running it through Facebook to figure out who they are, which is kind of a nifty little trick. And we're able to see the engaged audience then and some information about them. We picked 5 or 6 things. If you've used Facebook Audience Insights, there's many, many more than that. But in this case, where this was an example where we were obviously targeting women. We're saying 100% of the people who clicked met that. They were married, they were college grads, they were the high incomes you were looking for, they owned a home, that sort of stuff. And here's the other pages they like. One of the concerns with influencer marketing, and most marketing, but particularly influencer marketing, is there can be a whole lot of waste. How do I know that if I have somebody write a blog post and tweet about it, that the right people are going to see it? This is one way to say the right people were engaged with this content. So absolutely had to see it to be engaged, to Erin's earlier point, and they met your criteria. Or maybe it wasn't 100%. Maybe it was 65% female and 45% male. If that was the case, 35% male. If that was the case, then why? Is that an insight for the brand that males are more interested? Is it an insight that our targeting wasn't great? What was it that led to that? So there's gold in that data.
Yeah, I mean, there's not shown here, but there's a brand we had just worked with recently this summer where they were targeting moms of young children. And what was very interesting is when we got this data back, we were 100% female, 100% had kids, 100% were married, and 100% owned a home. That was very interesting to us, because while we weren't going after any specific type of mom, we just wanted mom with young kids, what we got back in the data and we started looking at their relevant page likes, it was moms in a very traditional family setting. And so that's now an insight for the brand, that they can see who's really reacting to these key messages. Is that the type of mom that is their best advocate? Is that maybe the type of mom they didn't want? So they need to tweak their message to get a different kind of mom. But it gives them that insight that they can take action on, not just for a future influencer campaign, but for their marketing as a whole.
Absolutely. So you made it. We promised to move fairly quickly. We've been about 38 minutes, so moving along pretty well. I do see a question here from Martin. Can you share a relevant travel case study and example? I can't pull it up on the screen because of the limitations of our friends at GoToWebinar, or maybe I'm just not smart enough to, but we did finish one recently for Wyndham Vacation Rentals, and that was one in which the campaign theme was around how travel can be stressful and how Wyndham Vacation Resorts takes a lot of the stress out of it for you. So the way we measured that was equivalent media value. It was also content value, in part because booking vacations is not quite like buying cars, but a little less frequent. I mean, other than Erin, most people don't go on vacation every month or so.
Oh, I think Jim's talking about himself. Yeah.
But so the planning process is a little bit longer. So in that particular case, we used that. We also did find in that particular case that influencers went well above and beyond what we asked them to do, in part because it was such a neat assignment.
Yeah, so there were 2 interesting things that came out of this campaign. One, we sent the influencers to vacation rentals, and so we typically have a minimum content production requirement for our influencers. We had one influencer who exceeded her minimums by 12 times. And part of that is because, we partnered with Wyndham to say, how do we get her the best experience possible? And so it was that surprise and delight for the influencers that had them going above and beyond. So content value was a big metric that Wyndham looked at, because now they don't have to go do photo shoots at all these properties. They now have real people in real settings on their properties that are not just showing the property themselves, but showing the area around the property. So now they have all this content they can use again. The other thing that was really important for them were the level, not just the level of engagements that they got, but the types of engagements. So we looked at each and every comment that was left, and we did an analysis on, were those comments bringing back the key messages that Wyndham wanted to get across. In this case, they were. So there was a surprise and delight on the quality of properties. There was the excitement about all the things that were available to do around the properties that Wyndham had. They were talking about vacation locations that people would never have thought to go to. So those key messages we're getting through when you do that conversation analysis, in addition to, just the raw number of engagements that happens.
So we have another question that came in. What types of tools would you need to calculate these kind of results? So it really varies. Obviously, direct sales lift, you're going to need to get the sales data from your client. That can be as simple as Excel exports from them over to you if you're particularly good at building correlation coefficients, or it can be, plugged into some of the advanced systems that do that, like RSI at the retail level. For the share of voice, most social listening, if actually any social listening platform can do that for you. Brandwatch and Sysomos and Radian 6 and blah, 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 blah. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, those platforms, but in this case, doing just share of voice, what we're looking at is benchmark versus campaign, and whatever their limitations are will be consistent throughout. So yes, they may be wrong, but they will be consistently wrong. And so you will be able to see lift, or if there was no lift as a result of it.
Yeah, the one thing to look for on that social listening tool, though, some social listening tools, depending on what your license is going to be, will have a limitation on how far you can go back. Those limitations are really important, because a standard is 6 months. If you don't have a good benchmark period in the last 6 months, you need to be able to go back farther than that. So,
like if you're doing a Christmas program
right.
versus last year's Christmas program, you need the data from holiday period.
Yeah. Another tool that is a nice to have, so that you're not calculating everything by yourself by hand in Excel, is some type of influencer management platform where you're pulling in the engagement data, and it's automatically pulling in the engagements around the content. Otherwise, having to go out and crawl that by hand, or God forbid you're trying to have an influencer give that to you. Good luck getting it from 95% of them, because they're
we used to do
very
it by
busy
hand.
people.
Yeah.
But having some type of influencer management platform where you can get that data not only in real time, but the other thing to look for, a lot of platforms will just scrape it once, the engagement results when the piece of content goes live, or 24 hours after it goes live, or what have you. Because of the long tail of a lot of this content, you're going to miss out on a lot of engagement. So it's good to look for a platform that's going to do, scrapes every 24 hours, or they're dialed into the API is really important.
And a lot of the other stuff, the formulas we created around some of our algorithms and audience stuff, that can all be done in Excel once you have that data. Another question came in, is there a certain amount of time that a campaign needs to run in order to get the right metrics?
Good question. Well, I can start with that. Jim talked a little bit earlier about the purchase cycle for products, and it's much different if you're looking at cars versus looking at a candy bar or something. So especially if you're looking at sales data, the campaign itself doesn't necessarily, you've got to think about how long it's going to take me to get in front of all the right people. So the length of the campaign itself doesn't have the biggest impact, but the period for which you're measuring results has a significant impact. So if the average person, here's a great example, we did a razor campaign. This campaign ran for 30 days. And one of the brand people on the call, their immediate reaction was, I looked at the sales data and I haven't seen lift yet. And of course, the person whose brand it was stepped up and they said, well, hold on, the average purchase cycle for refills for a razor is anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. So even if a person saw the piece of content on day one, they aren't likely to have made it into the store to buy this razor yet. And so when you think about both the life cycle of your metrics and also the life cycle of your campaign, how long do you need to consistently get in front of somebody in order to touch them enough so that they'll take that action based on the average purchase cycle for the product?
We have another question coming in. Has the industry as a whole embraced one social media measurement metric yet? And do you foresee this happening? Each of our clients uses a different formula, making it very challenging to measure our effectiveness. It sounds like you're from an agency. I can very much.
Do we feel you?
I've got a decade of relating to you with this question. I think the short answer is no. And one of the reasons that I don't expect to see it happening soon is that social media is different than, say, email marketing, right? Everybody in email marketing, how many did you send? How many got opened? How many got clicked? I mean, they're fairly, there's only so much you can do with an email. You can change the words, but, did you open it or not? Did you click it or not? It's fairly limited. With social media being multiple platforms used in multiple different ways with multiple reasons. So some people are doing sort of soft brand building over time, such as a Coca-Cola. Other people are doing hard, direct lead generation ads like you see for fidget spinners. Like, if we don't sell fidget spinners this month, we're never going to sell a fidget spinner. Like, we need ROI and sales. So there's so many people using that a different way. At one point years ago, there was an effort to quantify what a like was worth. That was fairly ludicrous because of all those permutations. But no, what we're trying to do with our clients with these 6 models is to have them sort of worked out in advance, and then saying to them, of our 6 models, you should use these 1 or 2 or sometimes 3. And when there's an edge case that comes in, sometimes you just can't build a new model. Sometimes you're just going to say either you think this is going to work or you don't think this is going to work, and I respect your decision. And you can't get a great measure. You can almost always get equivalent media value in some others, but sometimes there's going to be a little bit of faith in there. When there is an edge case, we have developed new metrics to accommodate that. So we had a client that, their measurement was, can you get people to my website? So we not only figured out how to do it, we built a guaranteed package of how many people we guaranteed to send to their website based on that. So no, I don't think you're going to get to those one things, but I do think if you have a hat you can hang on with your clients, say, here's how we measure it. Oh, and we'll also look to measure it your way, but we're going to share with you our measurements, which we now do routinely. And certain clients want their own stuff. A lot of clients don't want to think about it. And if you have an acceptable answer at the beginning of how it's going to be measured, many of them are grateful. It depends who you're talking to. Different people have different points of emphasis.
Yeah, I think a really good question to always ask on the upfront is, well, how do you measure whether your advertising is successful, your TV ads or your PR or your website or your email or whatever? And if you can get down to, unless they tell you a media mix model, and then
you're out of luck.
Sorry, because it's not possible, but trust me, we've tried. But if you can get down to what are the types of metrics that they're looking at for these other types of marketing, then you can get to, okay, how do we deliver some type of value equivalency model that puts us apples to apples with assumptions that everyone's comfortable with those metrics for those other types of marketing.
And we did that successfully for the Chrysler Group brand, so Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Ram, Fiat, where they don't know what sells a car either, right? I mean, there's all those TV commercials, and there's all those reviews, and there's all those other things. Ultimately, what comes down to why you bought that car is basically indiscernible. And so we asked that very question. How do you know if your TV ads or your digital ads or your other things were successful? And they gave us an answer, and then we were able to back into, okay, here's what our social did to drive those numbers too, and here's what it drove relative to what you invested in it, and it turned out to be very positive for us. So even asking that question reframes the conversation with the client, because sometimes they're not doing it at all. And it sort of makes them realize, oh, I don't really actually do this for anything. So why am I being so hard on influencer or social? So with that, I don't see any further questions coming in, and I promise to try and give you a few extra minutes back to your day. I want to thank you for spending time with us today. If you missed anything, we will be sending you the recording in the next probably day or so. So please feel free to listen again. Again, very much appreciate you taking the time with us. I'm Jim Tobin at Carusele here with Erin Ledbetter. I'm at JTobin on Twitter. She's at Social Chic on Twitter. And Instagram, I think. You're all over the place.
I am all over the place.
I should try this social media thing. Anyway, thanks so much for spending time with us. I hope you'll join us for a future webinar. Enjoy your day.